Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad, and this is a Flow podcast. This is the third episode, and the title is on the ramification of the earthquake in Syria and Turkey, with the focus on the case of Syria. And we are joined by several guests who will share with us their, first of all, how they're doing, and then their viewpoints on what has been going on, as well as on what has been going on the ground and beyond. I am, as everyone is here, out of words for the calamity that befell Syria and Turkey last week. As everyone probably knows, the death toll has surpassed 35 to 40,000 and is likely to double in the coming weeks. Some say these are conservative estimates, actually. Beyond the dead, we have some of the most destitute conditions overtaking the affected areas as a result of the lack of shelter, gas, food, blankets, and place to stay, among many, many other sources of misery, many of which not a function of the earthquake. This started as a natural disaster, but it became a lot more than that as a result of a history of corruption, repression, incompetence, and much more. And yet, in war-torn Syria, this is a culmination of another calamity, another chapter in its long recent history of misery that befell Syria mainly at the hands of the regime, but also at the hands of everyone else, states, groups, and individuals that got involved for their own purposes. Everyone ignored the well-being of Syria and Syrians in all cases. The earthquake followed suit. One might understand the cynicism, hostility, or callous nature of local, international, and regional political actors, but what stood out in the past week is much more disturbing. International human rights organizations and the international human rights system as a whole has failed to deal adequately with this disaster, with less than meager search and rescue efforts or other forms of support. A reminder of what sometimes happens when certain sorts of people are in distress. The reasons are multiple and complex, but they are evident. I am joined here by several of my colleagues who will share various aspects of the unfolding situation, as well as the historical background and the potentially very sad prospects for millions of people affected by the earthquake. This is, again, Flow Podcast, Episode 3, and it is co-sponsored by the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University, the Shar School at George Mason University, the Arab Studies Institute, and the Syrian Center for Policy Research. I am very excited to introduce my colleagues, and we have all of the material about their biography in the link that has been shared, and it will also be on this channel. For now, let me just say I am joined by Rabie Nasser, Katty Elhayek, and Basileus Zeno. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So I am very much looking forward to this conversation, and as I know so many others are. And I would like first to start by simply asking you all, how are you doing? So, كيفكن? How are your families, friends, relatives? Rabia, you can start. Katty, Basil. Somebody has to start, but that's how it, yeah.
Well, I will start. Thank you, Bassam, and all for this. Physically, I'm fine. I hope so. But I think within this catastrophe, I think this is a new level of the Syrian catastrophe that we are living. So yeah, we are not good at all in this regard.
Katty.
Uh, I think we're living unbelievable nightmare. I think like some conversation with family and friends, like my generation, people who participated in the Arab Spring, the Syrian uprising, and then were displaced by the conflict. We feel like really very low point of depression and loss of hope because the generally like generation like you live a natural disaster or a war or a displacement or like economic crisis and or pandemic, and in the last like since 2011 we have like lived like huge disasters and the huge, like we lost a lot. So it has like really been very difficult week. And it's like hard to really like talk and describe the feelings that we like feel. I feel like as a community, it's like actually in Arabic we used to joke that because the situation was so bad مو ناقصنا غير يضربنا زلزال, like which mean like it's so bad and we need like something to end it all, and then that something which was like a joke happened.
Basile?
Yeah, I don't know what to add to, but I think all of us are living by the hour, as they are digging up. I mean, it was very hard to read the statement from the White Helmet where they had been struggling, and I think I can't imagine such a nightmare where you hear the moaning of people under the rubble calling for help, and there are no equipment, and then these voices are fading away by the hour. Humanitarian aid from the UN shamefully didn't arrive until yesterday with a really modest delivery. And by each hour we are receiving nightmarish news, like whole families. You see note like usually one person die or an accident, but when you see the names of all the families, grandparents, parents, their kids, and they are holding each other, and you can't but you see your family in every single image that we have been grappling with. So I think this is a new layer of collective trauma. And the difference is that this collective trauma hit Turkey, Syria, regardless of the region of control or political affiliation. So death is all over the place, and with that, I don't know how we are doing. We are, we are resisting in a way that we are alive, but at the same time we have responsibility and towards like our beloved ones. Physically, we are fine. Psychologically, no one is fine.
Thanks all. We're going to move to a few questions and a discussion actually about what's going on. A quick intro, just so we can all take a breather, and we will be resuming in just 1 second. We are also, by the way, joined by over video, because we just recorded this earlier today because of a schedule conflict with Omar Dahi, who addressed the last 10 years of the war and uprising and how it exacerbated this current situation. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Lisa Wedeen, also couldn't make it, but we are likely to speak with more and more people going forward, and I'll be sharing more as we move forward. Rabie, would you like to start us out by giving us your take on, and I know that from various conversations and what the center is putting out, your center, that there's a serious disappointment with so much of what's going on in response. If we can start with your take on this, and then we'll get others to chime in.
Yeah, I think there is many entry point to read this catastrophe. We will start with an earthquake hit an war-torn country, and the country accumulated a war-centered governance and institutions. We have a new level of tyranny in terms of political actors. We have a very deep level of dependency on external military support, political support, and it has been a designed machine for dehumanizing Syrians. We lived this into different stages, into different levels, but we all of us want to see a turning point. And I think the earthquake showed that we are not heading toward any turning point to counter the conflict or the tyranny political institutions. It's the opposite, actually. We are deepening this. We are part of this kind of system that, including the national political actors, basically the regime, the Syrian regime, is the key actor who fuel and continue in a strategic way the deepening of this war and this conflict. I can talk more about this later on, but for now, I want to say that the behavior of the political actors who have been prepared their military capacity to fight against Syrians, to siege Syrians, to displace Syrians, they are not ready to help or to support even in such a natural catastrophic crisis. So the behavior of the regime toward the people who are under the rubble, who are dying by the minute, it's a signal that have been showed during the last 12 years. So it's not new, but all the time we are hope that we have the hope that there is a turning point somewhere. So we didn't saw this during the first week of after the earthquake. I can say the same that the non-state actors showed also the behavior of war-centered, dehumanizing people. They don't have the initiative or policies to shift their priorities toward the people, toward support the people or to save the people. So I think this is a first level of further catastrophe, and it gives us huge signals for the future that nevertheless that we are all of us have the fatigue of the war. They are not. They are ready to continue. The other level is when you see Turkey and Syria, it's amazing how the behavior of different regional and international actors behave. So Idlib, for instance, and North Aleppo in Syria hit it the most with the earthquake. And there is other regions to a lesser extent like Latakia and Hama. But you can see that all the humanitarian quote-unquote actors behave differently, discriminately between how they act in Turkey and in other regions. The UN, the EU, they don't want to change their arrangements before the earthquake with a fallacy arguments about the HTS or about who is controlling which area. And by this strategy and policies, we increase the victims, we increase the deaths and injuries and the people who suffer from the displacement. We can go also to compare in this regard about the level of hypocrisy about talking that we are on the ground, like the UN statement at the first day. But we don't know which ground. It's not the Syrian ground. It's somewhere else. It's like continuation of different level between the normative narrative that published for marketing and how they deal with the people. My final point that I want to see that on the other side, the society, people inside Syria, Syrian inside and outside, the international community in terms of individuals and civil society, I think they showed an incredible solidarity. This solidarity, for instance, in Syria, for people who are suffering from 12 years of war, from poverty, from deprivation, from fear, they showed a huge solidarity toward each other, and they have a huge many initiatives in different regions to support each other. But this has been hindered by the key actors who are controlling the political and military power. This solidarity need to be our base, our main power to build for the future. This is how I think we need to reinvest in the society again, and without giving any hope that we want to change the behavior or the policies or the goals of the key political actors.
Thanks, Rabia. Katty, can you share with us your observations as to the past week after the earthquake, what has transpired? And I know that you have, friends and family in the area. So any feedback or observations that attest to some of what we've been hearing would be appreciated.
So my parents live in the coast, and I actually during the earthquake, because they were, and at the beginning of the conflict, they had to leave our home for a while, so they were internally displaced. And on that night, my mom called me, she was on the street, they were very scared. They describe it really as the most terrifying experience in their life. And my mom is from the northwest, from a village in Idlib, two villages actually, that were really very affected by the conflict. They were controlled by non-state actors, or military groups, but also they were bound by the Syrian regime. And now the earthquake really destroyed that whole region. So this the complexities of really one type of oppression, natural oppression, and man-made oppression. But everyone I'm talking with, those who survived, have severe PTSD. But I also noticed recently some propaganda and misinformation going on. I'm not sure if it is produced by the Syrian regime or by people who do conspiracy theory and support that worldview. Because now a lot of people inside Syria believe that it's not an earthquake, it's something that the United States government did. I'm not sure if you heard that rumor. And there are videos that they're watching. So a lot of conspiracy theories going on. What I observed also, politicizing even of this tragedy by even academic. I'm very interested in intersectionality, understanding the complexities of lived experience. And I'm always shocked that people even who studies these issues theoretically cannot apply it to real world experiences, because yes, there is a lot of solidarity, but actually in comparison with Ukraine, or for example, always what happened with Afghanistan, Syria, it's different layer of complexities that a lot of people just don't want to engage with. And it's very easy to dehumanize Syrians, even in academia, because of the legacies of what Basileus is working on, war. Maybe he can talk more, but really the legacies of the war and terror and secretization of Syrians and Arab and Muslims bodies in the eyes of people in the West. And I'm talking about that because I lived in the United States for 10 years. I now live in Canada, and I feel like, okay, from this positionality, from like living in North America, what the communities that I live in can do for my community in Syria. And things always like complex. And because like if you're Syrian, if you came to this countries like our case, and you know like our complex stories in the United States and the unsuccessful immigration case, but even now in Canada, I'm like following, because there are a lot actually of displaced Syrian in Turkey who applied to come to Canada on permanent residency, and for years they are waiting for their application to be approved, and their application was not approved because they're like going through security checks. They are going through like medical and health check, and the application takes years. And even if you like now here and you want to bring your family, it's not possible. And I was like reading in comparison, for example, to the earthquake in 2010, in the Haitian earthquake that was like similar in magnitude. It was like 7.0, and the community here were able in 2010 to advocate to like bring a lot of displaced Haitian by the earthquake, and the permanent residency application to bring these people, for example, to Canada took between 6 and 12 weeks. But now I'm reading analysis that such an effort to replicate, to bring Syrians, especially the most marginalized, or families who like have already relatives and friends here and can sponsor them, the process does not like look at all gonna work out because of this like racialization of and securitization of Syrian bodies. So I feel like there are like multiple level of complexities if you're like a Syrian person living around the world, that you should like navigate, even if like you want to like help. Um, it's like not like easy way to offer the kind of help that you want to offer.
Thanks, Katty. You mentioned Basileus, and Basileus is with us, luckily. You mentioned some of his research, which might impinge on this discussion. Basileus, it's your turn.
So thank you, Bassam. Thank you, Katty and Rabie. I think you both covered like extremely important aspects of the ramification of the earthquake and the aftermath. I want to emphasize like 2 points, like in mentioned by Rabie and Katty. First, if you are following, and we will see that in the coming weeks and months. Unfortunately, warlords within the Syrian regime, the security sector, and within the opposition-held areas are seeing this as a new opportunity. They act as vultures who are blackmailing and negotiating how many baskets they would allow, take photos, and then circulate that. The first statement problematically by the Syrian regime in the UN was basically, we are a sovereign state. Syria should be the only channel for redistributing humanitarian aid. And there are confirmed reports about basically looting and on the street. I don't know if you are following, but every day people inside Syria, and despite this security grip, are taking their phones and going to the streets, and they are launching a campaign on social media. It's of Dahuhon, expose them. So basically, anyone who is selling humanitarian aids that have the logo of the UNHCR, they are filming them and actually contesting them. And despite receiving threats and some were detained by the security forces, they are resisting in many ways and taking a very brave stance despite being demonized by Syrian diaspora, unfortunately, calling anyone who is questioning the American sanctions as Assadist, which reflects actually how many of them, unfortunately, are reflecting the very same oppressive mechanism that the Syrian regime has been using for many years, where everyday people basically who are stuck inside Syria, who couldn't leave, the most impoverished, basically are penalized twice: penalized for being under the prestige of the regime, and penalized for having such a great opposition whose interest and acting as local informant basically became their own policy. Some act based on good intention. I'm not going to question that, but the positionality is extremely important for many reasons. Really, anyone who is making the argument. So there are, and I hope Rabie, who is also and Omar are experts on sanctions and their ramifications. But anyone who is making an argument that American sanctions don't affect everyday people and it's a lie, I think it's just ask them if they have ever tried to open a bank account while holding a Syrian passport. I'm not talking about those who are British Syrian or American Syrians or French Syrians whose families are next to them and never had to deal or even try to send the remittance to their family. One concrete example from our life: Bank of America recently shut down our account, citing American sanctions. You are a Syrian citizens, don't have permanent residence in the United States, we are shutting down your account unless you prove residency. Second thing, they shut down, actually froze our credit cards. A few weeks ago, we tried to send like $300 to my brother who is in California for medication to our parents. $300. Immediately, 1 second. Block, because you are Syrian under sanctions. And they wanted the address of our parents, the kind of prescription. They wanted the address of my brother, why I'm sending that. So it took a week, actually, until we threatened that to expose them as this is a discrimination. Because it's legal to be Syrian. It's legal to have family. It's legal to have someone who is elderly. It's legal to have send medications. There and this is and I faced that as someone who lived as a PhD student in the United States and then as a professor. The first thing, the ramification of and this is before, this is why structurally it's important to address these points. I don't believe the American administrative, if they say it doesn't affect people on the ground. And the regime is taking advantage of that, of course. The regime wants to alleviate, making that, oh, we can't distribute aid to affected areas because we don't have no. There were millions that have been disputed, but there were looting. There is corruption. That's definitely one aspect. But let's put it simply. There are many currently inside Damascus, Latakia, Jabli, Tartus, Hama. Local communities are mobilizing. $100 or $200 can make a difference. You can't directly do that. We have many of our friends launch a GoFundMe. Immediately, thank you for your solidarity. We are supporting the victims in Syria and Turkey. But in conclusion, we are shutting down your account because Syria is under sanction. So I really don't know where Syrian diaspora is living, because they are living in another planet. And they are directly affecting our family as the Syrian regime is affecting our family. As everyone is mobilizing this and to score basically political points. Those who died basically in Idlib are our families. Those who died in southern Turkey are our families. Those who died in Latakia or Jabli are our families. Of course, I have a political stance, but at least being transformed into a vulture even after 12 years of massive destruction became ethically and even empirically unacceptable. This is the personal reflection, but there's a second layer to this. One of the aspects that is hindering and blocking Syrians in exile who don't have citizenship, like our case, privileged citizenship, is basically our bodies have been securitized, the war on terror. So every Syrian, Iranian, or Afghani, or Libyan, or Yemeni are potential terrorists. And that actually affects it imposes a kind of collective punishment. And I hope Rabie will be talking a little bit about the impact of sanctions on everyday people. I'm not going to address, because it's easy to make it about whether it affects the regime versus the non-regime. And that's the narrative that's being dealt with so far. The second aspect I want to address, and that's something that I have been working for many years is really addressing the needs in a sustainable way beyond humanitarian aid, transforming Syrians into basically disabled body in constant need for support or cash. That's not sustainable. Many Syrians who were displaced in Turkey, over 3 million or around 4 million, they built a whole new life over the past 10 years. They enrolled in university. They had dreamed to continue their education. With the massive destruction in the southern Turkey, they lost not just families, but they are about to lose their education once again. So, and that's during my field work in the United States, that's created a gap, because even when they resettle them, they're in the global north, like the United States and Canada, they don't match basically their educational need. They match based on age. And that's creating really, in the long run, like drain in terms of human capital, social capital, and also the possibility of having more economic access and for the development inside the country and outside the country.
Thanks, Basil. I just want to remind everybody that this is a discussion on the ramifications of the earthquake in war-torn Syria, with a lot of commentary about the inadequate support that Syrians have been getting, definitely from the regime, but also from the international organizations and the international humanitarian system. We actually did speak with, I spoke with Omar Dahi, who could not join us at this moment, but was able to respond to my question on the background of this earthquake, basically the last 12 years of war and uprisings in Syria, and how they might have exacerbated the current calamity. So here's his response.
Thank you, Bassam, and thank you for organizing this conversation. In terms of the effect of the last decade of war, it's hard to summarize it in such a short space, but I think it's really important for people who haven't followed what's been happening in Syria for the last months and years, even though they might have a general, of course, understanding of what was taking place. But the first thing to say is that if you were to make a mapping of some of the most vulnerable populations in the country, in Syria, and I'm going to focus mainly on the impact of the disaster inside Syria. Of course, there's a lot of commonalities between what's happening in Syria, obviously, and in Turkey, but just for Syria for the time being, if you take a mapping of some of the most vulnerable areas in Syria prior to the earthquake, it would map over almost exactly in terms of the location where the earthquake hit, meaning that the populations that are in the northwest of the country have already been some of the most devastated populations, some of the populations that have experienced and are currently experiencing the most need prior to the earthquake. So this added to a population that was already devastated, an area that has witnessed war, that has been bombed. And I think every time there is a disaster of this nature, even though actually we haven't seen anything like this, at least in a single incident, in terms of the impact, in terms of the fallout and the likely impact many years moving forward, it becomes a flashpoint for debate between the different partisans of the war, between the different sides. And a lot of times this debate and this discussion, the very loud aspect of it is not helpful in understanding the context very well, because more often than not, it becomes an attempt to deflect responsibility to the other. It's all, whether it's from the regime side, deflecting responsibility to the opposition side, and vice versa. And of course, a lot of what they say, there's a lot of truth to what both sides are saying to analyze the situation, but it doesn't give us the full picture. So that I think it's important to know that this is in some aspects the price the Syrians and in many cases the people inside Turkey who are affected by this, for a lack of a serious attention to a political solution to the conflict. We've been saying for many years, those of us who have been advocating, that unless you have a political settlement that guarantees the the minimum requirements of justice, the minimum requirements of rebuilding the legitimacy and the relationship between state and society, between the different components of society, between a minimal investment in economic rehabilitation and economic resilience, you will likely to have more catastrophes down the road. And we did not expect this catastrophe in particular, but it was not beyond the realm of imagination to think that there is an unexpected, but perhaps not completely unexpected, maybe a surprising but not unexpected event that will have a catastrophic impact. Because at the moment it happens, there is no clear legitimacy, there is no clear understanding and mutual relations between the different parties in order to organize an effective response. And to basically make a little bit more concrete, first of all, we've seen a decade of destruction of state capacity, and the destruction of state capacity is really the fault of all the major parties involved. It's the fault of the Syrian state for essentially pursuing overwhelmingly, and especially after the first 2 or 3 years, pretty much only a military solution to the conflict without a serious investment in a political solution. And you can say the similar thing from the opposition side and the enablers of the opposition, the regional states and the international states that have enabled a maximalist solution to the conflict. And what that has meant is that the war has raged on. It has destroyed state capacity. It has destroyed the inherent resilience of the different populations in the different areas in the country, the economic basis. So that's one aspect of it that I think is really something that is a legacy of this decade. And then when there was a winding down of the conflict, what suited the different parties was essentially ending war without pursuing peace, ending war without pursuing a meaningful and comprehensive settlement. And comprehensive doesn't mean that every single issue is addressed immediately, but there's a path where everyone at least comes together and tries to basically think about how to move beyond the state of war. And I think that's a key aspect of this, because one of the things you saw, for example, just to give it more concretely, examples of aid and convoys and trucks trying to pass from one area from under the control of areas under, let's say, Kurdish political parties, that they would not be allowed under areas under control of Turkish political parties, and similar things between similar incidents happening between the areas controlled by the Syrian government and the opposition. This is a legacy of the conflict. This does not mean that that's the only aspect now that needs to sort of have our attention moving forward, but this is definitely one of the legacies of that of those many years of devastation.
Thank you, Omar. This was Omar, directly almost before the podcast. I had asked him this question because we wanted to provide some context, because as I shared early on in the opening, this is a calamity on top of a disaster, or you can reverse them. I would like to move to our almost final segment. We're trying to stay within an hour. And I'd like to ask everyone here, also starting with the same, unless people want to jump in, please feel free to jump in at any point. I'll start with Rabie. I'll just ask, what can be done now? I cannot share how many times I've heard this question. And it is, of course, I mean, everything is well-meaning, but, you know, the answer is very difficult for many, many reasons. But I'll ask you to share with us what can be done now, what's happening on the ground, and perhaps share with us any ideas that you think would be productive for the, I'm assuming, tens of thousands and perhaps millions altogether between Syria and Turkey who are still suffering and are now without shelter in the cold and so on. So please, the floor is yours.
Maybe a follow up on on some of the discussion that have been done so far. I think first, you can't do now with the same tools that led to this catastrophe. As you mentioned, Bassam, at the beginning, that it is a natural disaster transformed into man-made disaster, like the corona, like cholera, like any external disaster can be transformed by our management, our governance toward a further disaster or a shift toward a transformation to a better situation. I just I visit Japan with you, Bassam, in 2017, and tsunami occurred on 2004, and we visit a site where they still working in 2017 and they didn't finish. So
in Japan.
in Japan. So this is yeah, it is. I mean, ironic to compare, but at least to say that a country with a proper institutions, with a democratic government, with a people who are active and trust the institutions, we will suffer for a decade or more as a further impact of this earthquake. So first, we don't have that. Our foundations is a conflict foundations. The deterioration in the last 3 years, while we have, of course, we have a continuation war in Syria. This is for by all means, by all evidence that we have, and the actors behave accordingly. They are building their capacity based on military capacity, which is not transformed in the earthquake to support people. This is, I mean, very another ironic indicator that they don't have any intention, not just to support or just to ignore. They are really dehumanizing and punishing people in a collective punishment. So within this machine of governance and institutions, if you invest more humanitarian support, I don't think we will recover or transform. That's why I want to highlight some key aspects in this regard. And if I want to continue with what Omar said about that the dynamics of conflict and the continuation of that, our understanding of the last 3 years in our research in the center, that although we have less military operations, you have further deterioration. And it's not because of the sanctions. Of course, as Basileus said, there is an impact of the sanctions. And there is a sanctions on the Syrian regime. There is a sanctions on HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And there is a sanctions on northeast of Syria. So it's not one kind of sanctions. And there is anti-sanctions. So because there is sanctions, the Russian and Iranian support the regime in an exceptional way. So there is very complicated issue about the sanctions, but I will say the following, that it is the fourth or fifth factor that affect the Syrians. So giving this as a priority for discussion is irrelevant. If the sanctions increase the cost of financial transactions or the cost of production, this is not comparable to the strategy of the institutions that control the state or the non-state actors who targeting people, excluding people, and making the priorities against people. You will not affected by sanctions, I mean, as an essential factors, if you are internally building your participatory institutions. You are close to the community and society. You can go around any kind of external sanctions if you are an institution that represents people. And I will not go further in this to say that our priority is that we have an institutions that it's the enemy of people. And when we see the role of the supporter, like the Russian, the American, the Turkish government during the earthquake, you can see that we are lacking the minimum support toward the priority of society. you can't open the cross borders because the Turkish don't allow it, and because the EU don't want to send rescue teams to Idlib. There is a very continuation of policies that it's not considering people, and I think this will continue. So let's not put any dream about this. So this is from the political military actors, and just I will give you a hint about what could have been done. Like if the Americans said, "Let's open the cross borders," it will be open. If the Russian and American want to use their military bases to support those people, they could have done that. But of course, this is not a priority for all of them. Now, the other way that we are surviving, as the UN like to say, we are resilience toward the crisis. This is the most, fallacy that I've been dealing with. We are not resilient. We are people who don't have a choice. So many, I will say, there's amazing work by the civil society institutions inside Syria. They have done a huge work, but the problem that it's not transformed toward an actor. There is many influential civil society institutions who is doing a great work, but they are not part of a Syrian society representative. They are not part of putting priorities for the policies for the Syrian people. They are individuals most of the time working for services for filling the gap. It is the idea of civil society by Western countries, that you are here to fill the gap, to do some advocacy or to do some services. But in the case of Syria, this is the only actor who can be an actor to support people or to participate with people. And I think this is a huge responsibility for the civil society, is to transform from the dependency on humanitarian strategy and policies to change the governance, to be part of the political actor, quote unquote, to start to negotiate, to start to expand the public policy based on our discussion as a civil society actors, not as an institutions that cannot do anything. We are on the ground and we doing a great work in terms of supporting people, but unfortunately it's without a long-term strategy. It's always as responsive instead of being looking for the future and transforming, for instance, humanitarian into development. After 12 years, we still increasing our dependency on aid. And if I can give about this 2 examples. The Northwest invested a lot in recovery projects, but it's under the direct control by the Turkish. So it was good for that period, but when the earthquake happened, it's a governance that you don't control. It's a decision that you can't take. So the capacity of the local councils or the Syrian interim government or the HTS disappeared, because it's a huge political dependency. It's a huge governance that dependent on external actor with different priorities. So the only way to counter this is that the civil society building their role in the governance and their role in the political representation. And the other side, that the humanitarian support didn't transform Syrians into more capable to survive. We are dependent in 2022 more than 2012, because it is about humanitarian assistance, I will say, for just reducing part of the injustice, not to transform or counter the foundation that leading to this. So I hope that civil society can upgrade this rule for a further and future transformation.
Shukran. Thank you, Rabia. I'm assuming that was your last word.
No, Yeah. Yes, if you like.
No, because I mean, that was sort of
I
my
took
follow-up
long. Yeah.
final
Sorry.
question. La, 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 I wanted to ask precisely what you answered, like as a last round. Katty and Basile, please chime in with your observations as to what can one do, what might happen next, and any last words you'd like to share. And I also have a clip from Omar sharing his view on. And I'd like to say that all our guests today are Syrians, which is also very important, and they're speaking for themselves. Katty.
So I want to add that to thank Rabia for everything he said and the deep analysis of the larger structure of the crisis, but also like for our audience who are watching, I would assume speak English, are either academics, researchers, or policymakers, or graduate students, or students of the Middle East studies, that understanding the larger structure is important, but also understanding our agency. So like still work on aid, still work on like donation, and uh, publicizing that in your network, because there is a huge need for humanitarian aid and humanitarian donation. So please continue do that, because who like said that the pessimistic of the Marx,
Gramsci.
Gramsci. Can you remember the quote? Can you remember the whole quote?
A pessimism of the
Of the
mind and optimism of the will.
Of the will, yes. So like always to remember that we can still do something. If you cannot like advocate for your whole government, the US government, Canadian government, or other government to like participate to the structural change that we want, so that's good. But in the meantime also like do the small things, because we also like need that. There are people and family who lost their homes, I'm sure, like especially like children and vulnerable women's, for now they need like the like simple basic needs to be met. So we still like need to support organization who are doing that, and not like go to depression and pessimism. Because I have a lot of conversation I have, like especially with my students, like what we can do. And now I'm like also I want to like promote critical hope, and that yes, the world sucks, things are extremely bad, but they have always also been bad, and we still like need to like exercise our agency and try to do our part, even if it was small. But also thinking about the larger structures of governments and international aid, and trying to change that, which I'm not like hopeful, because we have been trying to change that for like many years. And so maybe Basilios will add.
تفضل باسيل.
Thank you, Rabia and Katty, and Omar as well. I think so. There are short-term and mid-term needs, of course, and there are long-term needs. The long-term needs, Rabia and Omar addressed them. That there is a problematic emphasis from the pro-opposition and pro-regime on the significance of sanctions, as if sanctions as the one that caused the earthquake, or the consequences of the how the Syrian regime is dealing with the crisis right now. So as he said, like it's the fourth or fifth factor, but it's definitely affecting everyday people, like your family, your immediate family, local initiatives that are here and there. And there are many, believe there are many local initiatives that aren't affiliated with the Syrian state or any organization. There are many that are popping up right now, like on the ground. So what is the best way to support them? I'm thinking about it now inside Syria. And in the north, east and northwest, how to navigate also the challenges in terms of sending equipment. You need to now reconstruction, rebuilding houses, taking the rubble, the wreckage. How what's the like how you can send equipment and navigate this system of sanctions, like in terms of the long term. So I want to emphasize in the short term and mid-term, there is definitely desperate need for humanitarian aid toward like southern Turkey and also Syria, whether in the opposition held or the Syrian held areas. So all areas are in desperate need for help. One of the things that we can do, Bassam, towards the day, we can share links that like scholars and organization might consider to donate to whatever organization they feel comfortable with, whether you prefer the white helmets or the Syrian Red Cross or the UN. It's really wherever you see like and trust your money. It's absolutely fine, because whatever will happen, like there is a desperate need on the ground, regardless where you. So the fight over that and the overemphasis over that, it's mystifying the underlying causes of the conflict, which is transformed really from towards normalization. So basically, the massive destruction, the dissolution of the state institutions, and the warlord that emerged in all areas in Syria, as if it's something normal. It's part of, and this is part of the racism that we see also in mostly in Western think tank and also in academy. Like, oh, this is their life. This is the normal life. But when that happened in Ukraine, this is not normal. This is Europe, right? It should be like we should meet the reaction, like at least in balance. Why that matters? Because there is another second and third layer: documentations. Many Syrians, like in the north, lost their documentation under rubble. And especially we are talking about 3.6 or 7 million Syrian refugees. The majority of them, the area that were hit is the area where the majority of refugees are located. So many don't have any kind of documents right now. So what they're gonna deal with their life, especially with the surge in racism against Syrians and the attack, the systematic attack that they are witnessing. And the crisis will continue for many weeks and months and even years. As Rabie said, like until today, 10 years after when you visited Japan, and the consequences are still not dealt with. And we are talking about democratic societies, rich and supported, and with no sanctions or any obstacles that we are facing currently in the case of Syria. So how, in terms of as Syrians have been securitized as basically a threat to Europe, a threat to the United States, a threat to Turkey. So those who lost all their documents, how they are going to basically support and maintain their lives. Second, what can we provide like fund or scholarship through institutions that basically over the past 12 years, many institutions, many scholars, many supportive actually, and they are doing great job, but there are many others they could have done a lot. Securing grants, securing like scholarship for students who lost everything. Psychological support is extremely needed. Now we are talking about families that part of someone who lost all their family, or they thank God because one of their kids survived, the rest died. So there is really desperate need for also psychological support, not in the short term, but also in the long term. And finally, but in the long term, really, how can we approach questions of supporting civil society without NGOization this civil society, without actually creating this binary where the state actually, the objective of the state, dissiluted, the state in Syria, for instance, and currently in Turkey, have been transformed into an oppressive machines that basically doesn't even pretend to care about their population. Today there was a meeting with the UN representative with Assad, and they said they don't mind sending humanitarian aid even to occupied areas and areas where terrorists are existing. So this dehumanizing rhetoric exists all over the place, and so we should resist these kinds of narrative. We should resist these kinds of binaries. We simplifying the dynamics of the conflict, and also taking one aspect, one consequence of the conflict, and amplifying that as it's the cause and for the aftermath. So that being said, I think we, for years to come, we will be dealing with what happened in Syria and Turkey on Sunday, and hopefully we can address that as much as we can.
Thanks, Basil. Thanks to everyone. Before we wrap up, let me just share Omar Dahi's last word, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you all for being patient. Thanks to everyone who's watching and listening. Feel free to share this podcast. And I have one more question, which has to do with actual things that people can do sitting in their living rooms all over the world, whether in the region or here. So let's go to Omar's last word. Any last words or parting words?
Well, the other thing I'd say is that obviously this is a tragedy beyond belief. This is something that is really causing the devastation for millions and millions of people, and it's going to take us months and years to realize the full extent. Also, a lot of decisions are going to be made very soon in terms of how to address this, and are being made on a day-to-day basis that will impact the populations who live in those areas for many years. So I think this is a time not just to maximize our assistance efforts, maximize our relief efforts, but also a time to maximize our push for justice, a push for meaningful investment in society, in people, and a shift away from the conflict, a shift away from investment in war and polarization. And one of the, I guess, positives you can take from this is that seeing the Syrian civil society from across the political spectrum, I have to say, despite some of the continuing polarization, there's been a very positive response that goes against the grain of the polarization due to the conflict, of the feeling of a common fate for all Syrians, a feeling for the need to actually bridge the divide from the conflict. It's a very small expression, and of course, it's not the only and decisive factor that will make a difference, because it needs to be followed up by more initiatives and more structures, and as I said, meaningful attention to something that goes beyond that. But I would say that's one of the few heartening things I would take away from this.
All right. I mean, I do have a lot to say, but we just went over an hour, and I actually won't be saying anything original at this point. And I am, like everyone else, wondering what I can do. This is a quick question, you don't have to answer it. Are there direct mechanisms through which we can provide support? Are there ones that are more productive than others? Should people be careful as to where they support, how they support, where they support, and so on? Just a quick question, because that's what everybody keeps asking, and I could provide links in the description, but I just wanted to get people's take, because there's a discussion over the extent to which some of these things are actually getting there. So I'll also start with Rabie. Just a quick response on your behalf, and then we'll wrap up. Hopefully we will speak again, and hopefully things would have gotten less horrendous.
I will second what Omar said. I think the support is not the people in Syria in a huge need. They need the support. I think it is how to find out the individual networks or credible actors on the ground. This is very important, but there is many free riders in this world, so we have to be careful of this. I don't suggest any names the people need to find out by their search and by their looking for who is the more serious and credible. But what I hope so that we support the Syrians as in terms of the humanitarian support and in terms of supporting the transformation, transformation of the conflict. This conflict has been supported, fueled directly and indirectly by different actors. So the global community can be very supportive in this regard to make a gradual, long-term transformation of this. And this is what I hope that will be the real investment for Syrians to overcome the catastrophe.
Shukran, Katty, Basil. Any last words on these questions before we wrap up?
Okay, I just want to repeat again, like what I emphasized in my intervention before, Omar. Again, we all seeing, like, once you share a link, let's say, let's face it, and bluntly said, like, you share a link for Mulham group, which I highly respect, or and I trust their work personally, or the White Helmet or the Syrian Red Cross, you will have backlash from the other team that this is propaganda, blah blah blah. So this is why I'm saying, literally, whatever your political affiliation and you believe your donation is going to help and assist population because the whole area has been impacted, go ahead for that. Like we aren't going to replicate and
That's a good
reproduce this
approach.
dynamic. Really, where your heart is, go ahead and don't blame others for having, choosing X organization or Y organization, because they aren't donating this to this organization. They are trying their best because they can carry tools and have nails to dig up the earth. That's what they can do. So
Thanks.
really, if you believe the UNHCR is doing a great job, or UNICEF or the Syrian Red Cross, go ahead for that. Don't accuse the other who are trying doing the same of being terrorists or whatever, and vice versa. If you are supporting this, don't accuse anyone who is supporting the Red Cross of being Assadist or like. Literally, for just 1 minute, put your heart on what you believe in and donate, and don't accuse any people, because we have been devastated for 12 years, and this is a collective trauma that we are all experiencing. So save us this lecture for one day, and that's my hope.
Shukran, Katty.
Yeah, because I'm like, we're talking about question of donations because that's what we have been asked for the last few days, like how we can donate, how we can help. And I would add that yes, sometimes like you might like not know where I should like donate as individual, as maybe students of Middle East studies. I work, for example, with groups like Mulham Volunteering Team, and they like have a lot of people like criticize them online. But we have to remember these people are working under like large amount of trauma and PTSD for the last 12 years. They're dealing with the most marginalized people. They're like dealing with like difficult, heartbreaking story on a daily life for the last 12 years, and they're doing their best under like really hard conditions. So if you're passionate and want to donate for such a group, I like really support that on the short term. But of course, on the large term, we should keep advocating for larger structure, reforming of how aid and development and post-conflict Syria, like what type of country we want to do. We, as Syrian, we hope to have, but also if you are in North America or Western Europe on one of these influential rich government, keep advocating for like sponsorship, for aid, for immigration reform, that the most marginalized Syrian committee member who were affected by the war and by the disaster can come here and get the care and support that they can. So don't like despair, don't lose hope, and all the like big structures really, that's history, that's the present, always things are complicated. But I feel like also our individual agency and our individual role can play small rule in the short term and hopefully in the long term.
Thank you, Katty. Thanks, Basil. Thanks, Rabie. And thanks, Omar, for participating and enlightening all of us with a lot of important observations that I think at this point are extremely helpful in navigating what's going on and moving forward with whatever it is that we would like to do and contribute. The only thing I'd like to add is what I have been adding or advocating since I have participated in any public effort at doing something in this world, and that is as important as it is today to help, to contribute, to raise awareness. It's also important, perhaps even more important, to do it between disasters, between wars, between crises, between the killings, and so on and so forth. So these are the times that are actually far more abundant in terms of time and in terms of effects, which is the area between two disasters that might be weeks, months, or what have you. We all tend to get busy, and that's totally fine, but it is really important to understand that some of these recurring problems are not going to go away unless there is a sustained effort in between crises. So I hope that we try to do this in any which way possible. Each of us has their means, from each according to their capacity. And with that, I will close. شكرا شكرا للجميع. شكرا ربيع. شكرا باسيل. شكرا كاتي. شكرا عمر. We
شكرا بس.
will هلا and we will be joined by others on this particular podcast and elsewhere. As many of you watching or listening know, that there are lots of organizations that we are all involved in producing critical knowledge on the region and beyond. So we will see you soon, and this is again Flow Podcast episode 3, and Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.